news continues.
Welcome back to Solutions for Financial Independence. Joining me now, John Halterman with Beacon Wealth Management. How are you doing, John?
I'm doing great, Nick. How are you?
Doing really well, thank you. This week we have a question. It's from Jessica in Pennsboro. She says, I was looking at my 401k statement and I noticed that my portfolio returns underperformed the S&P 500. Should I be worried?
Well, Jessica, that's all going to be relative to the amount of risk you're actually taking in your portfolio. Because I don't know exactly how much risk you're taking, but as an example, if you're in something that's the exact same risk as the S&P 500, then of course you got to be concerned, because what you got to say is, I'm taking the same amount of risk, why can't I do or make the same amount of return? But if you're in something that's 50% the amount of risk, then of course on the upside you should expect 50% less return, because there is a trade-off in investing. We call it the risk-reward trade-off. And all that boils down to is, the more potential risk you take, the more potential reward you're going to get. Of course, if you take less risk, there's potentially going to be less reward.
So there's definitely some type of trade-off for her depending on what her situation is.
And absolutely. And what I always tell people is, when you're investing, you really should establish what I call a risk number. And what that is what risk level are you comfortable with? As an example, in a software we use called Riskalyze, the S&P 500 has a risk of about 76. So if you were to take the test and you came up with in the 30s, well, that means you're about half the risk of the S&P. So what you should expect is, the trade-off is, for less risk and less volatility, you're going to probably get less reward. But of course, if you're higher risk and you're comfortable with that, and what I always tell people is, if you're trying to outperform the S&P, you've got to also be willing to get all the downside that goes along with it.
So it really just depends on how risky you are, I guess.
Absolutely. The riskier you are, potentially, the more you can earn. But of course, it's a relative term.
All right. Thank you so much, John. Folks,
You're welcome.
if you missed any of that, you can always find it online. Don't go anywhere. Much more for you after the break.